All right, hello everyone. Hi. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the contributed talk session this morning. So we're in the neural mechanisms of learning and memory session. And first up, we're going to hear from Huang from Natalia Velez's group at Princeton University. Let's give Ham a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming this early to the contributor talk, given there was a nice party last night. And my name is Ham. You may know me as the walking around cape guy, poster cape guy. I'm a third-year PhD student at Princeton University, co-advised by Tom Griffith and Natalia Velez. I'm really excited to stand here to share with you the preliminary results of my ongoing project in collaboration with both of my advisors and Ivan Rusek, which is a postdoc right now, but is about to be a professor soon. It's my first time attending CCN, so I'm a little nervous, but I look forward to hearing all of your good feedback on this project. Okay, so we know people have limited cognitive resources to store information. Memory is limited, but people can collaborate to overcome them. For example, I may not always remember what the lab account number is, but my collaborator, well, in this case, my PI, Natalia, does remember it, so it's okay that I don't remember it, because she can tell me. With both brains, we can encode more information in memory collaboratively than each one of us alone. However, we need a convention to decide who is in charge of remembering what kind of information. Otherwise, the following scenario will happen. I ask, what is the lab account? And Natalia thought I was supposed to remember that. Then nobody remembers that information. Often we form actually these conventions successfully and actually often tacitly to divide cognitive labor. The question we want to answer in this project is, how adaptive is this division of labor when encoding memory? Is it simply a good heuristics that people follow to always just split up cognitive labor? Or people are smart about it and only divide cognitive labor when it's more beneficial to do so? So that's the main question we want to answer here. To answer this question, we designed a spatial working memory task where participants need to remember a grid of images. So these images are covered in gray tiles, and participants can study them by hovering their mouse on a computer like this for 10 seconds. They have 10 seconds to try to remember as many pictures as possible. After 10 seconds, all images will be covered, and one tile is randomly queried, indicated by these question marks here. And participants have to recall what image was underneath that tile. They can indicate their response by clicking one of these 4 possible options. They can take as much time as they want in this stage. And then there's 1 second to display whether they're right or not. Okay, so this is roughly what one trial of this task looks like from the view of the participant. You see they're trying to remember, just hovering over for 10 seconds, and then boom, one of these is queried. This is a lucky one, I got it right. Okay, so each participant did 20 trials of this task by themselves. We call it the solo phase. However, they either played the easy 2x2 grid, that's pretty easy, or the middle 4x4 grid, or the very difficult 6x6 grid. They also did this task with a partner for 40 trials. I call it the dyadic phase. So dia just means, it's a fancy word for 2 people. The order of the solo and dyadic phase is counterbalanced, so it's randomized. Sometimes it's before, sometimes, so solo is after dyad. The dyadic trials look very similar. So here's one example of 2 players playing a dyadic trial. You'll see in real time, each person can see through this orange tile which image, which location is the other person is looking at. And then they're queried the same tile. One of them responds first, the other responds second. The first person who responds and get it right, then both of them get a point. Otherwise, neither of them get a point. They always share the same point, so this task is entirely collaborative. Okay, next we need a way to quantify the cognitive benefit of dividing up cognitive labor in this task. To do so, we use a computational model to benchmark the optimal strategy. This model posits that each player has a certain amount of memory resources, as visualized here by a bunch of disks. And at each time point during the 10 seconds, they're just trying to hover over and allocate this memory resource to one of these locations. So here's kind of a run through of what the model kind of looks like. At the first time point, you hover over this tile and you put some resource on there, and here, here. And there's also forgetting. Sometimes you lose resource from these tiles. And then fast forward to the end of the 10 seconds, you have roughly a distribution of your memory resource like this. And one of the tiles is randomly queried, indicated by this green square here. And then the model would just say the likelihood for you to recall that is proportional to how much resource is left there at the end of 10 seconds. Okay, in this case, there are 3 disks. So this is the function that roughly what it looks like to convert the resource to recall probability. As you notice, this is a concave function, and we can prove the concavity from signal detection theory. The optimal strategy here is actually just to spread your memory resource as evenly as possible to all of these tiles. We can prove that just from the concavity of this curve. It's also very intuitive when you think about it. Okay, so that's the optimal strategy if you do it alone. The optimal strategy if you do it with a partner in the dyadic case is to split up proportionally the space. So you allocate some here and the partner allocate there. And how much you take in charge is proportional to your ability. So through simulation, we showed that in the medium difficulty condition, the 4x4 grid, there is the highest benefit for you to actually split up the space. If it's too easy, you can do it alone. If it's too hard, then even dividing up the space doesn't improve your performance very much. So indeed, that's what we see from the actual human data. If you look here in the middle, in the medium grid size, you see the biggest difference between people's accuracy in a dyadic versus solo phase. So people also vary in their strategy. Some people collaborate more, and they tend to divide up the space like this. Other people don't really do so. They don't really collaborate, and they just treat the dyadic phase as if it's a solo one. The main interest is this plot. So the y-axis plots basically how much spatial overlap, which is the indicator of how collaborative they are. The lower the number means the strategy is more akin to the one on the top. They're splitting up the space, forming a division of labor. And the higher the number indicates the lower kind of strategy, meaning people are kind of just doing things by themselves. 1 just means we benchmark it by the nominal spatial overlap of mouse hover in the solo scenario. As you can see, in the easy condition, people don't really split up the task, right? It's very high here, and they just do it by themselves. However, in both the medium and hard condition, people tend to split up the space and form some kind of division of labor convention, even if in a hard condition, doing so does not help them very much in their task performance. So in conclusion, people adapt their decisions to collaborate to some extent to divide the labor, but when the task is very difficult, people tend to collaborate and divide cognitive labor no matter what, despite minimal benefit. So this is a link to the abstract, and here are some of my information. And I want to thank all my collaborators and people who contributed to this project, and you for listening to it. Thank you very much. And there's a poster as well, C70 at the upper floor, and come for some bonus results. And I'm happy to take any questions and feedback. Thank you.
All right, any questions from the audience? We have time for one question. Okay. All right. So next up we have. Let's invite our next speaker. So next up, we have Zoran Tiganj from the University of Indiana Bloomington, and he will talk to us about a computational model for episodic timelines based on a spectrum of synaptic decay rates. And welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Zoran. Yeah, I'm going to present work done with James, Sarah, and Sahaj on computational model for episodic timeline. For the folks who were here at CCN last year, you may remember this pin board, and then again for all of us that are here this year, we have seen this one. This was taken a couple of days ago, so it's a little fewer pins, but I think the distribution is roughly the same. My point is that we are forming various types of episodic memories. At each of these conferences, we are talking with people, we are seeing posters, yet we are able to differentiate, say, if you met someone at a poster 2 days ago and you see them again tonight, you're unlikely to mix up that particular experience with, say, a CCN a year ago, even though all those poster sessions semantically are very similar, the events are temporally very distinct, and somehow we are able to keep our episodic memory separated when they're formed at different times. What we're trying to address here is how to separate synaptic associations, assuming that those synaptic associations are responsible for encoding episodic memories. For example, associations that were formed this and last year. And we're proposing a timeline of synaptic weights. So we're proposing a computational model that basically does not treat synaptic weights as scalars, but treats them as vectors, such that elements of those vectors encode the change in the synaptic strength at different moments in the past. So I'm going to dive into that right now. Let's start with a very simple example. Let's say we form some synaptic association, some new memory. So the change in the synaptic weight is this blue bar over here, that represents magnitude of that change. And just from a computational perspective, if we want to keep track when that change happened, we can have the synaptic weight basically just gradually change over time. We can just let it exponentially decay over time. But in reality, synaptic changes will keep happening, and if we have a single decaying trace, that's just not going to be sufficient to keep track of when the changes occurred. So what we are proposing is to think of synaptic weights in terms of vectors rather than scalars, represent them as vectors rather than scalars, and in particular argue that they can act as leaky integrators with a spectrum of time constants. So they can gradually decay with a spectrum of time constants. If that's the case, then there is a simple linear decoder that has analytically computed weight, so there is nothing to be trained, that can convert this representation of gradually decaying synaptic traces into a representation of sequentially activated traces. If we have something like this, if we have a set of sequentially activated traces, then basically we have a timeline of what happened when, or when the changes in the synaptic weights occurred. So for instance, just by reading off these sequential activations, we can say that, well, this activation peaks soon after the change occurred, so that represents what happened very recently in the past. This activation peaks later, so it represents what happened a little further in the past, and this one peaks even later, represents what happened even further in the past. So say 200 steps after this change has happened, we basically have a trace that tells us when the change happened. And if this delta pulse moves, the representation would move along with it. And everything is linear here, so if the representation contains multiple changes of different magnitudes, what we are basically encoding is a timeline of those changes. So here we have some smaller change, and then more recently we had a bigger change, and this representation encodes that exactly, that there was some bigger change and then some smaller change. And in particular, due to the choice we made on the time constants of these leaky integrators and some mathematical properties of this system, we are getting high resolution for more recent past and lower resolution for more distant past. So basically this is a logarithmically compressed representation of these synaptic changes. This same framework has been used by us and others in the past for modeling temporally organized working memory. So in that case, rather than keeping track of synaptic changes, we just kept track of the input and used neural activity to encode that representation. So basically in blue I have this previous framework where we encoded input stimulus, and then we had leaky integration, but represented in a gradually changing firing rate, rather than here where we are talking about gradually changing synaptic weights. So basically we had a framework that constructs a timeline of working memory on the order of seconds, and now I'm discussing, using the same types of equations, a framework that encodes episodic timeline. And in our paper, we are merging those two together, basically building a timeline that can store these different episodic memories. So to illustrate that, let's take a simple paradigm. Let's imagine we have some stimulus like a bell. And that stimulus triggers a set of sequentially activated units. So these blue lines, each row represents activity of an individual neuron. They activate sequentially, so this would be something like hippocampal time cells. This is all on the order of, say, on the order of seconds. So let's say 10 seconds later, if we are in Boston in 2024, maybe we had a Boston cream pie, and we formed some associations between some stimulus that predicted it and that particular reward. basically just Hebbian associations, those that fire together wire together, so the magnitude depends on the strength, on the level of activation. Then maybe this year we got our stroopwafels, maybe 15 seconds after some salient stimulus, so we also formed some associations. Now, the question is, when we have all those synaptic associations, how do we dissociate when they were formed? Which of those associations was formed before and roughly when they were formed? So the whole idea of this framework is basically to break these scalar synapses into vectors and encode them as a timeline such that we keep track of the changes in those synapses. So for example, for this synapse here, we have information that, oh, okay, this one changed in 2025, and this one here changed in 2024. And let me just illustrate that briefly through another example where we took it to a little more realistic type of an input. In this case, we took a simple video of a person waking up in a hotel room and walking towards the window. And that's basically everything that is happening in the video. We took the clip embeddings of the video and fed that inside of our model. When the person reaches the window and opens the curtain, at first it sees a scenery of Paris. So this is supposed to be Eiffel Tower up there. So it sees a scenery of Paris, and then there's just some noise coming in. And then everything happens again the same after some long period of time. Person wakes up in a hotel room, opens the curtain, sees a scenery of London. Totally missed opportunity to integrate Amsterdam here. Sorry about that. And then the semantic cue, after some noise, the semantic cue repeats again. So now we have, we all had that type of experience. You wake up and you somehow still know where you are. You can get a sense of, you can temporally organize your memories. So in this case, we are repeating those semantic cues. We are repeating the cues of waking up in a hotel room and trying to basically predict where one is. If we are just using the associative memory, pure associative memory, then Paris and London are equally strongly represented in that one. But if you're using this property that we have temporally organized synapses, that we have a temporal resolution across when these associations were formed, we can probe the memory at different parts of the past and recover individual episodes. So in this case, if we probe the memory around when the London memory was formed, we get a clip vector similarity between text vector for London and these images and the content of the memory being high, and also then prediction of the episode for London. If we probe it where the Paris part was, we get strong match between semantic vector for Paris and the content of memory for Paris, and also a prediction of the Paris episode. We have more details and information in the paper. Also present this at the poster C73. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Zoran. We have time for a few questions.
Hi, thank you. Super interesting idea. I wanted to ask, do you think there could be some biological mechanism that can implement this temporal sort of memory in real neurons, maybe in dendrite structure or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have anything on the neurobiological level to pinpoint. We were more focused on building a computational framework, but that's definitely a next step for us to think about in terms of how exactly on the level of neurobiology this could be implemented. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's very interesting. How would this algorithm deal with the noise in the estimation of the neural firing rates, and also with the decay in the number of usable synapses over long intervals?
Right. So the resolution itself decays as logarithmically compressed effectively. So the number density decays as a power law function. The number density of the units representing every moment in the past. That itself, on one side, accounts reasonably well for a lot of behavioral phenomena. The whole drive for modeling, on one side, working memory using those logarithmically compressed representations, and episodic memory was to basically align it with Weber-Frachtner law. On more neurobiological level, whether In terms of resources, I'm not sure I have the answer, but from the computational side, from the sort of cognitive perspective, that was the drive that, okay, if we do it log compressed, that at least aligns with the behavior, so we're hypothesizing there ought to be some mechanism to actually support it at these particular timescales.
All right, thanks again, Zoran. Okay, so next up we have Kate Nussenbaum from Princeton and now Boston University. And welcome, Kate.
Thank you. So thanks, I'm Kate. I'm excited to share with you ongoing work with Nathaniel Daw about strategic counterfactual learning. So we learn from direct experience by taking actions, observing their outcomes, and then updating our beliefs about the values of those actions. But we also learn, and potentially we learn even more from imagined experience by harnessing mental models to simulate the consequences of actions we could have taken. And this has been demonstrated across many studies of counterfactual learning. But in most studies of counterfactual learning, participants only need to consider one alternative action at a time. In the real world, though, in most situations, there's typically a very large number of alternatives that we could consider. And we can't possibly think about everything, so we're faced with this problem of needing to select only a subset of possibilities to consider. How do we solve this problem? Well, some past work across different domains has hinted that people may rationally prioritize simulation of possibilities that will best facilitate adaptive future behavior. And our goal in the present work is to build on these past findings to more precisely characterize how people leverage mental models to select possibilities to think about. We're ultimately really interested in characterizing individual differences in this rational prioritization process, as well as how those individual differences emerge over developmental timescales. But to get at these questions, we first need to develop a fun behavioral task that will allow us to measure variation in these model-based learning processes. So that's really what I'm going to highlight today. Okay, so what we came up with is this battle cards game, and I'm going to attempt to play a video of it. Okay, so you can think of this game as a mashup of rock, paper, scissors and the Pokemon card game. On every trial, participants have to select from those 5 cards. They have to select one to play against a computerized opponent. The computerized opponent will also select a card, and then they'll both be flipped over to reveal the outcome of the matchup. Each one of the cards will defeat 2 other cards, tie itself, and lose against 2 other cards. So we tried to make the matchups really intuitive to make them easy to learn. Let me just play this again. Oop. So for example, the water card will defeat the fire card and the rock card, and the fire card will defeat the grass card and the ice card. Okay, so in this game, participants first went through a series of instructions to learn this deterministic payoff matrix, and they also completed 2 pretty extensive interactive tutorials to make sure they learned it really, really well. They then played a series of 8 real games against 8 different opponents. Real games each involved 20 trials. And participants were told that each opponent had different preferred cards. So this opponent might prefer to play rock cards and fire cards, and this other opponent might prefer to play ice cards. Now importantly, so this meant that participants could learn through trial and error which cards tended to be good against each opponent. And importantly, participants were told that their opponents had assembled their entire decks ahead of time. And so this meant that their card selections would be predetermined and they wouldn't be responsive to what the participant actually played. So all participants had to try to do was try to learn their preferred cards. They didn't have to try to be tricky or unpredictable to trick their opponent. Okay, so to figure out which cards would be good against each opponent, participants could learn through experience by playing a card, observing the outcome of that selection, and then updating their belief about the value of that card. So here, for example, if the participant played ice and their opponent played fire, they could update their belief that playing ice against this opponent is not particularly good. But importantly, because participants had learned the full model of the task, they could also imagine how many points they would have won or lost had they played any of the other 4 cards. And so then they can update their beliefs sort of counterfactually about these unplayed cards as well. All right, so what we found is that participants were able to learn to select good cards against each opponent, performing above chance level. And we also saw that participants did in fact rely on counterfactual learning. So on the second trial of each game, participants were more likely to select cards that would have earned 1 or 2 points on the previous trial. And so this indicates that people are leveraging a model of the task to play cards with which they have no direct experience against each opponent. What we really want to know, though, is how are participants learning? What are they learning about on each trial? Are they updating their beliefs about all 4 alternatives sort of equally on every trial? Or are they systematically prioritizing thinking about some alternatives more than others? So one important feature of this task is that the alternative outcomes differ along 2 dimensions. So first, they differ in valence, meaning the alternative outcomes can be either better than the outcome participants actually experienced or worse than the outcome they actually experienced. And they also differ in magnitude, so meaning they can result in a gain or loss of 0, 1, or 2 points. To characterize how people were learning, we fit variants of a model with both a factual and counterfactual learning component, where the learning rates varied along these 2 dimensions, so along these valence and magnitude dimensions. I want to just quickly point out that the 2 worst fitting models were the models that had full counterfactual learning and no counterfactual learning. So this indicates, kind of in accordance with our model agnostic results, people are learning counterfactually, but they're not fully updating their beliefs about every alternative on every single trial. And again, that was a feature of the design where we tried to actually tax people's capacity so that they couldn't do that. We found that our data was best characterized by a model with 4 counterfactual learning rates, indicating that people do systematically prioritize different updates. So first, replicating past work, we found a main effect of valence, indicating that participants engage in upward counterfactual learning, meaning they more strongly updated their beliefs about alternatives that would have been better than the action they actually selected. So if a participant played ice and lost 1 point, they're potentially thinking like, oh man, I should have played rock or I should have played water. And they're probably not really thinking, well, at least I didn't play grass. Extending past work, we also found that this valence effect varied depending on outcome magnitude. So specifically, participants most strongly updated their belief about the best alternative. So in this case, they were really thinking a lot about rock. Now this pattern of updating may be rational because if participants are capacity limited and can't think about everything, it may make sense to prioritize learning sort of the single best action because that might be most informative as to what they should do on the next trial. So we next asked how participants are actually learning about the options they did select. We sort of in accordance with this idea of a rational model, we initially thought that participants might update their beliefs about the cards they played more on trials when they selected a bad option, because selecting a bad option would indicate the need for them to shift their decision policy. But that's not actually what we found. So instead we found that here too, participants seemed to learn more when they played the best option. So factual learning rates were higher on trials when participants played the best possible card and won 2 points. So we still have more work to do to determine the extent to which participants' prioritization of value updates is kind of aligned with the predictions of rational models. Overall, we extended past findings on upward counterfactual learning to demonstrate that people prioritize learning not just about good options, but about the best option, whether they did or did not select it. Now, prioritizing learning about the best alternative may be a particularly rational strategy in situations like this, where all options are available on every trial. So in the future, we'd like to extend this work by manipulating the statistics of the task so that not all options are available on every trial. And we can potentially vary the frequency of options to see if participants also sort of learn more about options that they have more opportunity to choose in the future. More broadly, now that we have a task that enables us to measure how people selectively learn about alternatives, we're very excited to sort of extend this work to address questions about individual differences in simulation sort of capacity and strategy, as well as, again, how those differences emerge over development. So again, we're still at the early stages of this work, but if you'd like to hear more or have any feedback, please come by my poster. And I want to just end by thanking our funders and my advisor, Nathaniel Daw, who all this work was done in collaboration with. Thank you.
Okay, really interesting work. I have a question. How is it different from building like a memory model into RL, like Anne Collins' style of work, to explain this. So when you say people are not fully counterfactual, does that mean people have memory loss, decay that goes in parallel with the RL process? Or is it something entirely different?
Yeah, so I think in this work, we've tried to remain kind of agnostic about the actual mechanism of the prioritization. So basically the overall idea is that we have some type of limit on our cognitive resources, and we need to distribute them in some way, and ideally in a way that will help us the most in the future. But in terms of what that mechanism is, I think we need sort of further work to see, okay, is this an attentional mechanism where people are sort of only letting some information into working memory? Is it a kind of working memory sort of rehearsal mechanism where you're thinking over and over again about something, about one of the options more than others? Is it sort of a subconscious replay type mechanism where actually I've kind of described this as this conscious thinking process, but maybe it's operating below that. So I think it's a really good question. With this data, we don't know specifically what the mechanism is that's allowing that prioritization.
Time for one, but then I will encourage you to go to Kate's poster. Did you raise your hand?
Thank you. Really great talk. I was wondering, like this, pick the best alternative strategy. I could imagine that would be particularly successful for an easy opponent, right? Which also basically just goes with one card. So if you then identify the best counter card, you'll perform really well. But it would perhaps be less successful for the hard opponent. So do you indeed see also differences between those two conditions in the strategy that people used to learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did not see differences across the two block types. I should say participants faced 6 hard opponents and 2 easy opponents. We sort of loaded more on the hard opponents because we were worried with the easy ones they'd learn too quickly and we wouldn't be able to measure learning at all. With the hard, it's sort of weird, right? Because there's sort of 2 good cards. And so really though, the learning rates are fairly high, and so there's a lot of responsivity just to what happened on the previous trial. And so with only 20 trials, I don't think there's this like broader sort of meta strategy of how to actually do it, but almost more of an instinctive, okay, I'm just going to think about the best regardless of the type of opponent I face. And participants didn't actually know what type of opponent they were facing, nor did they know anything about the distribution of their preferred cards. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Okay. We're learning from the counterfactual because we had a session that ran long yesterday, so that's so we're like speeding through today. Okay, so next up we have John Bowler from the University of Utah. So please join me in welcoming John.
Great. Hi. So I'm interested in how past experiences impact future learning. So during learning, we reconfigure prior experiences into novel strategies and adapt them to new tasks. For example, many of you have probably had experience with this game on the left, and while you may not have encountered a 3D variant before, I bet with minimal examples you'd be able to update that past experience into successful strategies to play this, oh, it didn't come up, the new game. So in order to study how animals develop problem-solving strategies in the lab, we use a temporal variant of delayed non-match to sample. So the way this test works is the animal is presented with each trial starts with a LED cue, and then the animal is presented with 2 odors that are either of matching or non-matching durations, and the animal's goal is to lick when the odors are of non-matching durations, and withhold licking to the match trials. And for the paradigm we're using, we only use a short matched trial type. Now this is behavior that we need to train animals to perform over many days, layering in complexity in stages. And this presents a problem since we want to isolate the effective experience but also explore a large parameter space of shaping protocols and cue combinations. So to do this in animals would be prohibitively cumbersome. So for this we turn to task train RNNs. So the RNN that we're using has 2 modes, one for a start cue and the timed or notional odor cue. It has a fully connected recurrent layer, and it has a single output or response node, and the RNN is trained so that the activity of the response or output node matches the response window of the TD-NMS task. And my goal for the rest of the talk is to demonstrate how we use the RNN model to widen our aperture on our experimental data, filling in hard to observe contingencies while generating predictions we can test in the animal models. So first we started just by training the RNNs on the full task, and while we find that the RNN can perform the task somewhat well, it makes stereotypical errors such as responding early on this long short trial type. But we thought maybe this is like trying to learn the three-dimensional tic-tac-toe with never having encountered the normal variant. So we tried pre-training the RNNs on a shaping task, which matches the shaping tasks, the final phase of the shaping tasks we use in the animals. And we find that the RNN can learn the shaping task well and then goes on to perform the full task almost perfectly. But you know, we were curious, does the structure of this prior experience matter, or is any somewhat relevant pre-training going to help boost performance on the full task? So therefore, we also tried pre-training on a short, long, only shaping task, so just one of the two Go trial types. And we find that the RNNs can do this trial type well, but it does fail to boost performance once we bring in the full task. So for the RNN model, we see that the structure of this prior shaping task is critical, but does this relate to the animal's behavior? So we trained mice on a short, long, only shaping, pre-trained the mice on short, long, only shaping to see if it degraded their ability to learn the full task. Here I'm showing example licking behavior from a short, long, only pre-trained animal, and we find that, and this characteristic early licking on the long, short trial shows that indeed it kind of matches the prediction of our RNN model. And in fact, over more than a week of training, these mice failed to reach performance on mice that went through a properly structured shaping experience. But of course, what mechanistically gives rise to these behaviors? These mice were implanted with neural pixel probes in the MEC, or medial entorhinal cortex, a region that has previously been found to be required for learning this task. And the activity in this region also correlates with the strategies animals appear to be using. So in the animals now, we at least have a partial view of the neural dynamics that appear to be generating the different strategies that they employ when doing the task. And of course, in the RNN, we have a model, we have access to the full activity of the network at all time points, which I'm showing here in PCA space. For the RNNs with proper shaping, we reliably find the striking ring-like pattern in the first two principal components. If we rotate the structure and look at PC3 now, we can see some differential activity kind of correlating with the Q or response window. And this structure is absent in the networks that we didn't give a pre-training phase to, or the networks that we pre-trained on the short, long, only shaping task. So apparently the RNNs with proper shapings share some generalized structure across the trial types, and this kind of corresponds to having learned to abstract the concept of task timing from other features within the trials, such as the Q state. And to quantify this, we use a linear classifier to predict the task time, which we train on a single trial type and then apply it to the others. So here you can see a long, short trained classifier performs well, whereas it performs less well, indicated by this like off diagonal when it's applied to the short, long trials. And this is specific to based on the pre-training protocol that we put the RNNs for. And we try all different combinations of training and testing pairs and find that indeed this prior experience this well-structured prior experience does improve generalization. And then we did the same procedure now once we had the mouse data, and we find the same decoding error predicted by the RNN model in the animal data, and that properly structured shaping does lead to more generalization within the trials. But of course, how are these dynamical systems actually timing the cue and determining when to respond? And critically, we note that our system has two modes that it mainly operates in, one corresponding to when this timed or odor cue is on, and one when it is off. And it is only this mode in the internal state of the network that determines how it's going to update from one time point to the next. And in the RNN, we can hold the network in the on or off mode and then see how the network activity updates over time. So here each line corresponds to a separate initial condition and then the resulting trajectory traced out by the network in PCA space. And this is on a network that's had no pre-training on the task. And we can look at both here the Q on and Q off conditions. And we systematically probe these networks and find the fixed and slow points that activity is attracted to. This provides us with an understanding of the underlying structure of the network's dynamics in each of the two modes. In this no shaping network, the activity mainly moves left to right along the first principal component, so we kind of label it as like a leaky integrator strategy. Whereas in the network with a properly structured shaping experience, we have a Q on fixed point that's sort of offset in the third principal component, as well as a limit cycle that appears in the first two. And we kind of can therefore label this as sort of a queue detector plus timer strategy. And the critical insight here is that these two, based on experience, we have these two kind of different strategies emerging. And I'm going to focus on the well-trained network just to kind of give you an example of how this works. So the trajectories then during the task that the network traces out are a product of it simply being flipped between the Q on and Q off conditions. So this simulation is going to show how the activity of the RNN alternates between being pulled on towards that Q on fixed point and then falling back towards that Q off limit cycle. And I'm additionally going to overlay in red when the network is responding, so you have an idea of the behavior. So as you can see on the Go trials, the queue is on for long enough at the correct times that the network state is pulled very close to that fixed point, such that when the second queue turns off, the activity drops through this kind of output potent space you can see being highlighted in red here. And then on the short trial types, activity kind of misses that output potent space. So interestingly, we can use this framework then to look at how the networks will respond to novel patterns of the time queue. So here I'm showing three trial types of particular interest because they distinguish the proposed strategy by the RNNs from other potential ones. For instance, long is technically a matched trial, but because we didn't train on it, the proposed strategy by the RNNs treated as a Go trial type. We also tried a medium, and then also a single just extra long queue, and in all cases our RNN predicts that these should be treated as Go trials. So we tested these behaviors in mice, partially incorporating the probe trial types into the standard shuffle rotation, hoping that the mice would respond based on their previous training and not update their model of the task based on the probes. And for this we used well-trained mice, so you can see the mice respond robustly to the short, long, and long, short non-matched trial types while withholding licking to the no-go trial type. And indeed we find that on all three of our probe trial types, the mice treat them as Go trials and respond significantly more than on the no-go trial type they had learned previously, validating the prediction of the model. So how is learning shaped by experience? We find that properly structured experience can support this formation of abstractions through generalization in complex tasks. And in our task, this shows up as that limit cycle in the Q off condition that incorporates more information about the task structure, fine-tuning its sensitivity to the correct response window. And finally, we find that our task-trained RNNs were a good, unbiased way to suggest strategies and mechanisms for solving complex tasks that then provided us with testable predictions that we could use in the animals. Cool. Oh, and I want to thank my lab, my advisor, Jim Hayes, and the people who helped out on the project.
Yeah, beautiful talk, very cool delivered. And I love the visuals, really amazing. So, I mean, it's also a lot I'm trying to understand. And I was wondering especially about this. So how do you call this again? Like when in the PC space, when you have the this closing circle on itself, like how do you call this again? And what does it describe for the experiment, like the dynamics of the network? I didn't fully get that. Why is it not an attractor? Why is it circling?
Yeah. Okay. Here it's we're calling it an attractor because basically what happens is if the queue is off and you let the network just run for a long time, the activity of the network is basically going to collapse through this circle, but it never stops moving. It speeds up and slows down at different points in it, but so it kind of gets pulled onto this limit cycle that it just keeps going around, and that corresponds to roughly around the length of the trials. So that's kind of what's developed during the pre-training. And if I had more time, I could have shown that even after that initial pre-training phase of just the two Go trial types, that's already kind of emerged. And that's why what kind of distinguishes our like well-trained network that solves the task well from these like networks that don't solve the task well. It's pretty reliable. Like if you get that structure, then they're able to solve the task like with much higher performance.
And what is a queue again?
So for the animal task, the queue is an odor that it's timing, and for our RNNs, it's just a vector. It was either 0 or 1 if the queue is on or off, and then there's added noise. So that's why you get this kind of like it literally looks like the node here. That's how the queue looks, and you can see it's kind of timing out this pattern. And basically, if if the cue is on at the right times, then you kind of see this response node, which is also just trying to be 0 or 1 based on if it's responding or not.
Why should it even respond if there's no cue at all? Like, why should it respond if there's no cue at all? Like, I mean, what does red do if there's no cue?
If there's no cue, the rate is around, it should be around 0, but then it has, there's some noise on the input, so it moves a little bit.
Okay. So just a noisy behavior. This loop is just some noisy.
No. That loop. So that's the cue. The loop is the activity of the recurrent layer, which is tracing out the timing of the task. So that loop happens regardless of whether the cue is on or not, and the internal activity of the network is what's driving it around the loop, based on its training. Yeah. We can talk. I have a poster. It's 72. So if you want to come, yeah.
All right, so let's thank John one more time.
We're using a type C.
So our last speaker of the session is Mingze Leukos from New York University. Please welcome Mingze.
Thank you. I'm Mingze, and I'm very excited to talk to you guys today about how value-based attention guides learning in reinforcement learning. So as we explore the world, we have internal value estimates of features we see. We pay attention to the features we believe to have higher values, and we choose them. So we're building on two established links here. First, value influences attention, and then attention shapes action. Prior works have shown that first, stimuli previously paired with reward capturing feature-based attention, even when they are no longer valuable. Second, attentional focus predicts what gets selected. Subjects tend to fixate the option even prior to action selection. Today's goal is to pin down the function connecting value, attention, and action in a color value learning task. So in this task, 2 monkeys were trained to choose one of 3 colors on each trial. Behind the scenes, the true value distribution of the color are not revealed to the monkeys. This means that the monkey has to estimate the color's value through reward feedback. Critically, the true value distribution switches without cue roughly every 80 to 200 trials, so the monkeys must keep updating their internal value estimate. So we know the endpoints. We have stimuli input and we have action output. But what's the explicit mapping from a value estimate to attention and from attention to action? To answer this, we built a reinforcement learning model. First, the model's perceptual front-end processes stimuli through a bank of 100 color-tuned neurons, each preferring a specific color. These color-selective feature maps encode each color stimulus. Internal value estimate tells us which colors are the most valuable, so we attend to these colors more. For each color-tuned neuron, we calculate an attentional gain as a function of how close the neuron's preferred colors are to the attended colors. So the attentional gain determines how strongly each neuron's response was modulated as a function of what colors were attended. We multiply the color perception maps by the top-down attentional gain maps to form a priority map. Then the model chooses the color with the highest priority. After a choice, it computes reward prediction error and updates the internal value estimate. So what exactly is this attention as a function of value estimate thing? Which functions would be used to model attention? We compare multi-focused attention, in which there are multiple peaks spread across all of the colors, to single-focused attention, which is the cyan curve right there, in which there's only one peak of gain centered at the single most valuable color. Additionally, we want to explore if and how previous trial reward prediction error modulates attentional gain strengths of the attentional function. So we designed 5 functions describing the relationship between previous trial reward prediction error and attention. So there could be no reward prediction error modulation of attention whatsoever, or the reward prediction error modulation of the attention could be linear, absolute, quadratic, or what we call as switch, which basically inverts attention after a large negative prediction error. Now we have models with different attention functions. We now ask this question: which attention function in our models allows the models to match the monkey's learning behavior? Let's start with the monkey's learning curves. Notice 2 features: a fast rise in the earlier stages of the block, and a low plateau later. These 2 features are very important, so even though it's almost lunchtime, let's try to keep this in mind. Now let's overlay the single-focused models. We can naturally see that the single-focused attention learning curves generally fits animal learning better than the multi-focused attention learning curves, shown in the lower right corner. Among the single-focused attention learning curves, some of these models struggle to learn as quickly as the animals in the initial trials and plateau at too high a level of accuracy. For this short talk, I'll skip the statistics and focus on the visual takeaway. And the takeaway is that the yellow curve, which is the single-focused switch attention function, best matches animal learning curve shape, including the fast rise and the low plateau in performance. We also assessed behavior as a function of stimulus entropy, which tells us how close in color the stimuli are. Lower stimulus entropy means that one option is much closer to the most rewarded color than the others. Higher stimulus entropy means that the stimuli all look pretty much similar to each other. We binned trials by their entropy level and plotted the accuracy of each model. As entropy increases, accuracy decreases in the monkeys, and the single-focus switch attention model, which is shown in the yellow curves again, captures the same trend. Beyond accuracy and entropy, we also summarized additional metrics. The picture is consistent. Across metrics, the yellow model's single-focus switch attention function remains the best overall. Finally, neural data also supports our model. We correlated single neurons with previous trial reward prediction error. For this plot, you are looking at the number of significant reward prediction error correlated neurons over time. The peak is around the target onset. And I'm only showing the prefrontal cortex for clarity, but other regions show similar results. So we see that the neural signals do carry the reward prediction error information that our model uses to modulate attention. So to conclude, reward prediction error guided attention best explains animal learning. Among the different reward prediction error modulated attention functions, single-focused switch attention best explains behavior. Lastly, I would like to thank the Bushman Lab for having their data and code open sourced, which really helped our project. And we would also like to thank Albert Liang for helping us out in this project. And then I would like to give a shout out to potential collaborators. We would like to test the generality of our results. So if you think you have a data set that would be helpful for us, please reach out to us. You can contact me through my email below, or you can drop by my poster later today. My poster number is C96. Come by and we can talk more. Thank you.
Time for one question from the audience.
Thanks for the great talk. Which subregion of PFC recorded?
I think it's the LPFC. It's the one.
But ventral or dorsal, do you remember? Because there is a ventrolateral PFC and dorsolateral PFC, and both of them could be involved in this kind of computation, I think.
I think the neural data we use came as a part of the open source data that from the Bushman lab. So all I can tell you now for sure is that they use the LPFC. They also we also tested on the LIP and FEF neural data, which showed similar results.
I see. Thanks.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, so that concludes our session.